Introducing myself. I guess if you flipped open any random yearbook at Bayview High, you'd see my name, Ava Mitchell, somewhere in the most likely to succeed section. The one they save for kids who are always doing what they're supposed to, always showing up early and staying late, always looking like they're holding their life together, even when it feels like everything could fall apart at any minute. I'm 17, and for most of my high school years, I've walked the careful line between being the dependable daughter, the teacher's favorite, and the friend everyone trusts with their secrets. California sun, the hum of distant traffic, and the ocean breeze are simply part of my everyday. But honestly, I'd always thought of myself as just another girl, counting down the days until graduation. I grew up in a little craftsman house, about 20 minutes from the beach, in a neighborhood where everybody knows when you cut your hair, and birthday parties spill over from one backyard to another. My mom's a nurse, heart of gold, never stops moving, somehow knows half the people in our county hospital by name. My dad manages a hardware store and still calls me kiddo, even though we both know I'm taller than him now. They're good people, and for the longest time, all I wanted was to make them proud. That means a solid GPA, AP classes, volunteer hours, and the kind of application essays that read like you're already on a first-name basis with ambition itself. I love math more than I'd admit out loud, and sometimes catch myself solving equations in my head just to block out the world. When I was 8, I beat a group of boys in the local chess tournament, and I guess the victory kind of stuck with me. Proof that you don't have to be loud to outplay someone. Science club, debate team, a clipboard full of color-coded schedules. That's me, Ava the planner. People think I'm predictable, and maybe that's what makes the rest of this so hard to talk about. Because the truth is, underneath every honor roll certificate and every carefully reorganized binder, there's this gnawing fear. Am I only as good as my last grade, my next test score? Friendship, for me, was like a safety net. I hated the thought of anyone being left behind, so I always made space in my group for the quiet ones, the new kids, the ones who didn't quite fit. My closest friends, though, were Chloe, Madison, and Jess, girls as different as California's seasons. Chloe was all sunshine, Madison had this sharp wit, and Jess was the type who always noticed when you were struggling, even if you tried to hide it. Together, we braved homecoming dances, college prep workshops, and more midterms than I care to count. Sometimes I worried that I leaned on them too much, that I needed their approval to block out the noise in my own head. But the real truth, the part people don't see when they look at the yearbook photos, is that I've never really felt untouchable. I still get nervous speaking up in class. I still second-guess every decision. If my life was a story, those first 17 years were about keeping the peace, making sure everyone got along, that everyone felt included, that I never had to stand in the middle of storm. I thought loyalty meant always trusting your friends, always giving a little more of yourself. But as I'd soon learn, sometimes the people you let closest have their own secrets, their own reasons, and those reasons can break everything you thought you knew about yourself. Now, looking back, I wonder if I was too naive. Maybe I was just the girl who never thought she'd have to fight for her own name. Maybe I was too busy building everyone else up to ever imagine they'd take me down. False friendships. People like to glamorize high school friendships, make them look effortless and golden. But in truth, sometimes the lines between best friend and competitor blur so much. You can't tell which is which until it's far too late. If you looked at us, me, Chloe, Madison, and Jess, you'd probably think we were the tightest crew on the campus. We spent almost every afternoon at the corner booth in Hannah's diner, sharing greasy fries and swapping stories, the way girls in movies always seem to do. We celebrated each other's small victories and commiserated over heartbreaks. But there's something the movies always leave out: the shadows that creep in when ambitions get tangled up in loyalty. With the three of them, I was always open. I let them into every part of my world, even the messy, insecure bits. Chloe was the first person I'd call after a bad grade. Jess was the one who brought me hot chocolate during finals and whispered motivation in my ear right before debates. Madison had this way of making you laugh, even when you'd rather cry. In my eyes, we were unbreakable, a real force. We studied together, pulled all-nighters, even made color-coded study charts for upcoming SATs. But what I didn't realize was how subtly their words sometimes chipped away at my confidence. Whenever I mentioned applying for top scholarships, someone would crack a joke about me being a tryhard. Sometimes, I'd catch Madison glancing at me sideways when I got a test back, like she was measuring her own success against mine. At first, I ignored it. Who hasn't been jealous of a friend at some point, right? But after a while, the compliments started feeling heavy, backhanded. You always get perfect grades, don't you, Ava? Or, if anyone's getting that scholarship, it's you. On the surface, those words tasted sweet, but they left a strange aftertaste. I started doubting if we were rooting for each other, or secretly counting each other's wins and losses. Still, I trusted them. I let their opinions shape the decisions I made, the goals I chased. I told myself, real friends want the best for you, even when it hurts. But cracks were forming, and I couldn't see them yet. Sometimes I wonder if I'd paid closer attention to those tiny betrayals, would it have changed the way everything eventually crashed down? Maybe. Or maybe friendship means loving people even when you know they could hurt you, and hoping they'll choose not to. The blind side. If I ever write the story of my life, there will always be the before and the after that day. It started like any other drizzly March morning. Gray clouds hanging low outside the windows of Briarwood High. The faint scent of cafeteria cinnamon rolls clinging to the halls. I'd woken up early, reviewed my notes for AP chemistry, carefully printed the last words of my Gates scholarship essay, and felt, for once, a flicker of hope. Colleges loved a good comeback story, and I had worked myself into exhaustion trying to be the protagonist. But halfway through second period, the loudspeaker clicked on. "Ava Mitchell, please report to the dean's office." Whispers tumbled behind me as I gathered my things. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself maybe they just needed volunteer hours verified. Some clerical misunderstanding. When I knocked on the dean's office door, Ms. Morrison, one of those perfectly pressed administrators who never missed a detail, was waiting with a somber expression. Seated across from her was Mrs. Carson, my guidance counselor, looking at her folder like she wished it would swallow her whole. "Ava, please, sit down." My throat tightened. I took the chair, hands clammy. Ms. Morrison didn't waste any time. "We received some rather serious allegations regarding your academic integrity." Her words felt distant, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Carson slid a sheet of paper across the desk, a printout of a midterm exam. My handwriting, my name, but the answers were wrong, changed, marked out and rewritten in someone else's hand, the erasure marks still rough. "We found several altered answer sheets in your locker, Ava," Ms. Morrison continued, voice gentle but unyielding. "We also have a signed statement from a fellow student claiming they saw you tampering with your tests." I blinked at the paper, heart pounding. But that's not possible. I never. Mrs. Carson shook her head, as if reciting a line she'd practiced in the mirror. For now, you are suspended from all scholarship consideration and extracurricular activities until the investigation concludes. My lips moved, but no sound came out. I felt myself shrinking, the world narrowing to the filing cabinets, the gray-blue walls, the pity in the adults' eyes who kept repeating, "We just want you to tell the truth." The news traveled fast. By lunch, it was everywhere. My phone buzzed with cryptic texts. Some were from kids in my classes. "Is it true? Can't believe you'd do that." The worst, though, came from Chloe. "Ava, I told them what I saw. I'm sorry, but we need to be honest." Madison and Jess sent nothing at all. It was hard not to replay every moment, every inside joke, every whispered secret among us. I remembered the week before, the day Jess had offered to grab my homework binder just to help. Had I really trusted her with my locker combination? And Madison, who'd borrowed my favorite mechanical pencil, the one I used on all my major tests, handed it back with a half smile and a strange apology. That night, I lay awake, watching headlights sweep across my bedroom ceiling. My parents tried to comfort me, Mom muttering about misunderstandings, Dad pacing and making lists of who to call. But the ache in my chest was sharp, hollow, impossible to fill. I was suspended, banned from clubs, debate, and, worst of all, from the Gates Scholarship Panel interview scheduled 3 days later. In the days that followed, Briarwood felt colder, harder. Teachers would pause when I passed by, their voices gentle but distant. Hallways parted around me, like the Red Sea. Chloe, Madison, and Jess avoided my gaze, clinging to each other like shipwrecked sailors who'd already abandoned a sinking boat. At lunch, my seat stayed empty. Rumors grew. Maybe Ava had always been too good to be true. Maybe she'd finally cracked under the pressure. I spent those afternoons cradling my grief in silence, scrolling through old photos of my friends, searching their smiles for the moment trust had snapped. Was it during that last study session, when Chloe had insisted on checking my calculus notes? Or a few nights later, when Madison texted, "Hope you're ready for the interview," punctuated with a winking emoji that now felt cruelly ironic. The betrayal stung, not just the accusation, but the realization that the people I had trusted most had traded my dreams for theirs. I remembered Jess's confession, whispered so quietly, I almost missed it. "We're just so tired of being in your shadow." I wanted to scream that I'd never wanted to cast a shadow, only to stand beside them. As spring edged toward summer, the investigation dragged on. Evidence piled up, altered tests, forged notes, witness statements. I tried to fight back, but every protest sounded like desperation. The teachers who once championed me grew cold. The friends who promised loyalty now spoke in carefully rehearsed sentences, twisting events to fit their narrative. The world grew narrow, my future uncertain. Still, a part of me refused to lie down and take the fall. I became a ghost in the halls, listening, watching, piecing together snatches of overheard conversations. Why had Chloe been so insistent about my locker? Why did Madison always have to daze in the dark? The world became small in the aftermath. No one told you how betrayal and suspicion can make the brightest places feel like endless night. I'd always been the kind of person who filled my calendar with coffee dates and study sessions. Suddenly, they vanished. Like one by one, every color was drained from my life, replaced by an eerie silence. Waking up each morning, I'd lie in bed before my alarm, staring at the shadows on my ceiling, wishing I could turn invisible. I could barely look at my parents. Disappointment flickered in their eyes no matter how hard they tried to conceal it. My dad stopped telling his corny jokes at dinner. My mom hovered, asking quiet questions, leaving little notes. "We believe you," that only made the ache deeper. I knew they wanted to help, but what could they do? Even I felt unsure sometimes, gaslit by the system and my own memories, replaying every conversation for hints I might have missed. At school, isolation became my daily companion. My locker, once a bustling pit stop for friends, now stood like a shrine to all I'd lost. Passing in the halls, classmates gave me either a wide berth or the kind of stare reserved for animals at the zoo. Half pity, half horror, all curiosity. Some kids sent cryptic texts, "Are you okay?" or "Did you really do it?" Others ignored me, or worse, shared memes behind my back. If a teacher called on me, I stumbled over answers, my confidence leaking away word by word. No one trusted me, not even myself. Classwork blurred. I'd stare at assignments and wonder why I bothered. I tried asking for help, but guidance counselors deflected. "You need to let the process work itself out, Ava." I wanted to scream that my life wasn't a process. It was a wildfire, and no adult seemed interested in putting it out. The science club removed me as president, pending investigation. The phrasing so clinical, it hurt. Even math, my oldest friend, became an enemy. Equations stretched endlessly, unsolvable. For the first time in years, I considered giving up. If losing my reputation was bad, losing my friends was worse. Chloe and Jess had always been the first to text meme compilations in group chats or send sappy TikToks. Now their silence rang out louder than any accusation. Occasionally, I'd catch them in the cafeteria corners, eyes darting away as I walked past, laughter a little too forced, their lives moving on without me. I'd go home after classes and vanish into my room, the only place I felt remotely safe. There were nights I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in the principal's office, the way Ms. Callahan's voice flattened, how Ms. Phillips wouldn't quite meet my gaze. I felt small, like a bug under glass. Sleep was a stranger. I oscillated between nightmares and blank stretches of staring at the ceiling, counting the days until graduation, out of desperation, not anticipation. Grieving became routine. I grieved the loss of trust, the future I dreamed of, the friendships I thought were unbreakable. Grief is strange. It isn't all tears. Sometimes it's just numbness, a sense of floating above your life while everyone else goes about their own. My playlist shifted from pump-up songs to sad indie ballads. My bookshelf collected dust. I stopped responding to texts and ignored calls from people who only wanted the salacious details. My lowest moment came a week after the suspension, when my AP calculus teacher pulled me aside. "Ava, I hope you know you can recover from this," she said with forced cheer. But I saw reluctance in her eyes. I realized then that to most, I would always be a cautionary tale, not a person. Yet, something stubborn in me refused to vanish completely. I started journaling, not because I had hope, but because I needed somewhere to pour the heaviness. I wrote pages and pages, reliving the days before the accusations. I dissected every memory, searching for answers. Had Chloe been planning this all along? Was Madison resentful because she never placed first? Was Jess truly my friend, or just someone who found me convenient until my star shone too bright? I even started paying attention to what other people whispered. Lines caught in the bathroom, rumors about teacher favoritism, about the girls who cheated in Miss Carter's class and never got caught. Every day, the puzzle pieces shuffled a little closer into place. Maybe I wasn't just a scapegoat. Maybe this wasn't the first time my friends had played the system against someone else. Fury simmered beneath my sadness. It wasn't immediate, not cinematic, not sudden. It crept up, little by little, as the injustice hammered home. I realized if I wanted my life back, I was going to have to claw for it. No one else would. So I started planning. Not for vengeance, at least not at first, but for survival. My old skills, math, logic, competitive tenacity, flickered back to life. If I could solve for X, surely I could solve for truth. I mapped out who had access to what, kept meticulous notes about every strange detail, every forced smile and rumor. If my friends could set me up, maybe I could set the record straight. Those dark days dragged on. Sometimes the weight felt too much to bear. But anger is a stubborn fuel. And so is hope. When you've lost everything, even a tiny spark can get you moving again. And deep down, I knew. I owed it to myself, the real me, underneath the shattered reputation, to fight back, no matter how long the night lasted. Plotting my comeback. If you'd asked 16-year-old me if I'd ever be the kind of person to start plotting in secret, I probably would have laughed. I'd never even cheated on a vocab quiz, let alone thought about outsmarting my supposed friends. But something shifted inside me in those bleak, lonely weeks after the scandal broke. It was as if all the disappointment, all the confusion, and yes, all the anger hardened into something stubborn and bright, down, but not out. For the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for someone else to swoop in and save me. If I wanted the truth out there, I'd have to put the pieces together myself. The problem was my old instincts, the ones that told me to trust people, to keep the peace, weren't going to help anymore. I needed to think like a chess player, several moves ahead. These girls used the world's generosity like camouflage, hiding their jealousy and self-interest in pretty smiles and sympathetic texts. I had to look past the surface. So, I gave myself permission to become a detective in my own life. Every investigation starts with the facts. I opened a new journal, crisp, college-ruled, the kind that made me feel powerful just holding it, and began mapping out everything I remembered. What were the little moments that didn't add up? Who had access to my locker combination? Who had been alone around my papers or devices? I replayed every group study session, every ride home, every request to borrow my notes. I wrote it all down, drawing shaky boxes and arrows like I was plotting a conspiracy board. But my plan needed more than just speculation. I needed evidence. So I started talking and, more importantly, listening. It's amazing what people will let slip when they think you're no longer a threat. I overheard things in the halls. Snatches of conversation about making sure Ava can't show her face at graduation, and rumors about a certain teacher who seemed a little too cozy with my ex-friends. I knew I'd have to be careful. If they caught on that I was fighting back, they'd just close ranks tighter. So I played the part. Quiet, broken, no longer ambitious. I ignored their stares. When Chloe snickered in class, I barely flinched. Inside, though, I was gathering threads, quietly weaving them together. I set up a secure folder on my laptop where I recorded dates, times, who said what. When Jess crossed my path, I'd steer the conversation just enough to see if she'd drop a hint. I even started showing up at the library early, pretending to study, just to see who came and went, and what they whispered about when they thought I wasn't listening. One thing you learn when you're ostracized: loneliness sharpens your senses. Suddenly, things other people miss become obvious. The way Madison's voice trembled whenever the scholarship committee was mentioned. How Chloe would shoot Jess warning looks anytime I was nearby. Or that hallway where I once caught a glimpse of my own handwriting on forms in the principal's mailbox. A submission I'd never made myself. Every detail mattered. But what truly set my plan in motion was a bit of old-fashioned sleuthing, remembering how, weeks before the incident, our history teacher, Mr. Nelson, had once caught Jess with someone else's homework. I decided to dig deeper. I reached out under the radar to a sophomore named Tyrell, a quiet kid who everyone knew had fallen out with my former crew last semester. Pretending I was just checking in, I asked him about his experience. And boy, did Tyrell have stories. He told me about how Madison and her circle would use other people's work, passing it between themselves, and eventually pinning the blame on whoever looked weakest. In his case, he'd barely escaped a permanent mark on his record because his mom threatened to go public. It was clear. My situation wasn't unique. I was just their highest profile target yet. That gave me an idea. If they'd pulled this off before, maybe Tyrell had records, texts, or even screenshots. I gently asked if he'd be willing to share, in the name of clearing my name. After a little persuasion and the promise that he'd remain anonymous, he forwarded me a series of damning texts, jokes about getting Ms. Perfect in trouble, and thinly veiled confessions about making sure the scholarship is ours. Armed with all this, I knew I needed something stronger for the grown-ups, something they couldn't just brush off. So, for the first time ever, I used my phone as a covert recording device. Whenever I found myself near my former friends, I'd quietly start a voice memo. I recorded snippets of their conversations in the lunch line, caught stray accusations in the girls' bathroom, and waited for the day one of them might say too much. Over the span of a few weeks, I collected hours of audio. In one chilling recording, Chloe bragged, "She'll never see it coming," and Jess, with a laugh that made my stomach turn, replied, "It's easier than I thought. Nobody suspects us." If even half of what I'd collected got in front of the right people, there was a good chance the tide would turn. But I didn't want to risk blowing things too early. Instead, I sat on the information, biding my time until it would do the most good. My opportunity came when the school announced its annual awards night, a glitzy, too bright event where achievements were celebrated, scholarships handed out, and everyone, for one evening, pretended high school politics didn't exist. As the event loomed closer, I began prepping my dossier. I organized everything into a color-coded digital folder, audio files, screenshots, emails, even a timeline of every strange incident. I drafted a carefully worded letter to the scholarship committee, explaining my situation and attaching the key pieces of evidence. I printed copies, just in case anyone tried to claim my emails never arrived. The days leading up to the ceremony were nerve-wracking. Part hope, part terror. I barely slept, imagining every possible scenario. What if the evidence wasn't enough? What if they twisted things around again, putting the blame back on me? But deep down, some kernel of resolve had taken root. I wasn't that naive girl anymore. The one who thought friendship was forever, who followed every rule to the letter, and who believed that the system always protected the right people. I was still scared, still shaken, but I was also angry and hungry for justice. I channeled my old debate team energy, rehearsing arguments in front of my mirror. If I was called to defend myself, I'd be ready. For the first time since my life exploded, I felt like I had an actual plan. And best of all, I wasn't just acting for myself. Tyrell's relief when I told him I'd use his evidence carefully, maybe anonymously, made me realize I could help others who'd been burned by these girls too. I talked, quietly and carefully, to another classmate, Anna, who'd gotten a mysterious 0 in AP English after sharing her notes with Madison. The more I pieced together, the more everything snapped into focus. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was about standing up for everyone who'd been steamrolled or used as a scapegoat by people who saw empathy as a weakness. The night before the awards ceremony, with the entire house asleep, I sat at my desk staring at my folder. The nerves were back full force. My finger hovered over the send button on my email, addressed to the principal,
Emily.
vice principal, the scholarship board, and, importantly, a few trusted parents. After everything, it felt both right and terrifying to take action. Did I want my old life back? Or did I want to prove I could rebuild an even stronger one from the ashes? I hit send. The whisper of my laptop's fan was the only witness. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining all the ways things could go wrong, or right, or sideways. But that was out of my hands now. No matter what happened the next day, whether the school brushed me off, or whether the truth finally cracked through the plastic surface of high school politics, I knew one thing for sure. I'd finally started fighting for myself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt just the tiniest spark of hope, bright enough to light my way into whatever came next. Exposing the truth, if you told me, even a month before, that I would be the person to gather evidence, compile timelines, and essentially become my own defense lawyer, I would have called you crazy. I was the rule follower, Ava the planner, the type who'd get hives if I had to raise my hand against authority. But pain does funny things to people. It sharpens you and forces you to become someone you never knew you could be. As award night drew closer, the night I had decided would be the turning point, I became less the girl in the shadows and more the girl standing at the edge of the stage, ready to shine a light on everything my friends tried to hide. In the days before the event, my nerves stretched tight as piano wire. I double-checked every file, rehearsed talking points in front of my mirror, and combed over my correspondences with Tyrell and Anna, the students who supported my claims. I worried about everything. What if my audio files didn't play clearly? What if the teachers didn't care? Or even worse, what if the committee had already decided to sweep my case under the rug to protect the reputation of the school? I tried to keep my cool around my parents, but my mom caught me practicing statements in a whisper and just hugged me tight, neither of us needing to say a word about how much this all meant. My dad, in his steady way, left an envelope on my desk for when you need courage. The ceremony was Briarwood's big annual production. Spotlights, trophies, flowers that smelled like too much cleaning spray, and a crowd buzzing with nervous anticipation. I'd been to these events 3 years running with my friends, always on the short list for something. This year, I walked in alone, my heart a boulder in my chest. I found a seat in the third row, close enough to see the glow of the stage, but not so far forward that I'd be the center of attention. Yet, around me, students murmured. I could feel the sideways glances, hear the whispers. Even a few parents seemed to hover between sympathy and suspicion. My ex-friends sat together off to one side, swapping smiles for the cameras and pretending nothing was wrong. The principal started the night with his typical speech. Excellence, integrity, the Briarwood way. I wondered if he felt uneasy, hearing those words out loud, given everything they'd let happen. As the names were announced for scholarships and awards, time slowed to a syrupy crawl. When Jessica was called up as a scholarship finalist, I felt my fists clench. This was it, my moment. Just as she reached for the microphone to give her thank you speech, my email, sent to the scholarship board and school administrators, pinged into inboxes across the hall. I'd sent it minutes before, so they couldn't lose it or quietly ignore it. Inside were my recordings, text copies, visual evidence from Terrell and Anna, and a letter explaining the pattern, the why and the how. I'd also CC'd a parent volunteer and the local school board representative, knowing someone in that web would care about transparency if their own child could be next. On stage, the scholarship director held up a hand. The crowd stilled. "We need to pause this proceeding," he said, glancing at his tablet, eyes wide. He whispered with the principal, who looked deeply uncomfortable. The administration huddled, their faces flickering with anxiety and guilt under the harsh lights. It felt like something enormous was shifting in the room. A silent storm everyone felt but couldn't name. For a huge, agonizing stretch of minutes, there was confusion. Some students murmured that it was just a tech problem. Others started texting furiously. I saw parents in the back row scrolling their phones in surprise as my email, with its carefully worded subject line about urgent evidence of academic misconduct, made the rounds.
Welcome, honey.
The teachers who still believed in me gave startled looks. The ones who hadn't wanted to be involved tried to melt into their seats. Then, the principal returned to the microphone. His voice shook, the mask of control and easy cheer gone. "We've received new information this evening regarding the academic conduct and fairness of our scholarship selection. We must temporarily suspend the distribution of certain awards until a thorough review is conducted." Chloe, Madison, and Jessica looked frozen, caught somewhere between panic and rage. Chloe whispered fiercely to Madison, who was already red in the face. Even from across the aisle, I could see Jess's jaw tense. Their parents looked furious, but at them, not at me. Some kids in the audience started to whisper names and turned to look my way. I felt exposed, but there was also a strange relief, a sense of becoming visible, not as a villain, but as someone who'd finally forced the truth above ground. Teachers and board members filed out of the auditorium. I left my seat, my legs trembling with adrenaline, and followed when the principal motioned to speak with me. We sat in a side office, me, two teachers, and an assistant principal. They asked me to walk through the evidence, how I'd found it, why I believed my friends had set me up, what role others like Terrell and Anna played. I answered each question as calmly as I could, pointing to timelines and referencing the specific audio clips. This time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was making my case. As much for the kids who came after me as for myself. It wasn't a dramatic scene, not like in the movies. There were no yelling matches, no immediate confessions. But I could see the cracks in their facades, the dawning realization that they had to take me seriously. After what felt like hours, the administrators told me to go home, promising a full review. They even asked for Terrell and Anna's parents' contact info, a sign they were finally getting the picture that this wasn't just a he said, she said problem. I walked to the parking lot on unsteady legs, feeling at once totally wrung out and lighter than I had in months. The air was brisk and salty, and I drank it in, letting myself hope just a little for the first time in a long time. My parents met me by the car. They'd known to keep an eye out for me, and wrapped me in a hug that managed to say everything words couldn't. The next few days were a whirlwind. The school convened a disciplinary board. The evidence was reviewed, given to outside evaluators. Jess, Madison, and Chloe were each asked separately for statements. At first, they denied everything, but as the files were played, the connections laid bare. Their stories crumbled under the weight of all that proof. I heard later that one of them, Madison, couldn't take the pressure and finally admitted to her part telling the committee how the plan had started with jealousy, how they'd altered my tests to make me look like a cheater, and that this wasn't the first time they'd sabotaged someone vulnerable. All those extra details, the forged handwriting, the copied answers, the manipulation of teachers and scholarship boards, became facts on the record, not just rumors. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a stereotype or rumor, but as a person who had fought back against one of the oldest, ugliest truths of high school. Sometimes your worst enemies are the ones who once knew all your secrets. By the end of the week, the verdict came. I was exonerated, not just for the false accusations, but with a statement from the school acknowledging the failure of their own systems and expressing regret for the harm done to me and the others dragged into my friends' schemes. My name was cleared, the suspension was dropped, and I was invited to return to clubs in all scholarship considerations I'd lost. More than that, the school promised re-evaluation of academic integrity policies and a new whistleblower process, change that might actually outlast my own time at Briarwood. Some kids apologized. Most just looked awkward, unsure how to act around me, now that the narrative had flipped. The teachers who had believed in me greeted me differently, more warmly, but with a flicker of guilt for their earlier doubts. My inbox filled with hesitant, "Sorry, I didn't reach out sooner" messages. From classmates, from parents, even from a few staff who had real regret. The real apology, though, was the chance to rebuild my life with honesty. I threw myself into finishing the year with my head high, this time surrounded by new friends who saw strength in resilience rather than something to undermine. I know not everyone gets closure. Some truths never get told at the right time. But for me, standing there as the dust settled, I realized that exposing what was hidden, the ugly and the unfair, was never just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. It was about giving hope to anyone who ever found themselves erased by someone else's ambition. Regaining justice. When the email was sent and the auditorium had finally emptied out, I felt like the world stood still for a breathless moment. Everything I had feared and hoped for was now out of my hands, and my body ached with exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep fixes, but the bone-deep fatigue that comes from fighting for your own truth. The process that followed wasn't fast or cinematic. In fact, the days after the revelation contained a quiet, aching suspense. I watched life at Briarwood unfold as if I were outside a window, pressing my hands against the glass. The school's honor board convened, this time with actual urgency. I was asked to sit down with a panel. Administrators, teachers, a counselor I'd barely spoken to before, and two representatives from the school district who seemed determined not to be caught unawares again. I brought everything: my folders of evidence, my handwritten notes, the timeline of events, and a single trembling hope that I would be heard. It felt surreal to lay out the story from the beginning, how trust had been traded for envy, how every coincidence had been a step in a larger hidden plan. I tried not to let my voice crack as I played the audio files, careful never to gloat, just presenting facts cold and clear. Sitting in that stiff boardroom chair, I felt small at first. Then, as the truth poured out, a strange steadiness blossomed in my chest. The more I spoke, the more the pieces made sense. Not just for me, but for everyone in the room. There was a moment as Madison's confession was replayed and Terrell's testimony was read aloud, when I caught the principal's eyes. There was sorrow in them. For the first time, he really saw me, not as a problem or a warning, but as a girl who had simply been wronged and refused to disappear. After hours of questioning and review, they dismissed me to wait. I went home, feeling emptied and terrified. What if it wasn't enough? What if the adults found some technicality, some loophole, to appease the parents of my accusers and sweep me back under the rug? My parents hovered quietly at dinner that night, my mom gripping my shoulder as if to anchor me, my dad's hand covering mine with silent comfort. I barely tasted my food. My mind whirred with every what if imaginable. The next morning, a simple email arrived in my inbox before dawn. Please come to the principal's office before first period. My hands shook. I braced myself for anything. Another accusation, a hollow apology, or just maybe, the verdict I had fought so hard for. The principal greeted me with a softer voice than I had ever heard, and the counselor gave me a reassuring nod. They laid it out plainly. I was exonerated. My name had been cleared, the record expunged. All suspensions and barring from activities revoked. They informed me that the board would be implementing new safeguards to prevent this kind of targeted sabotage from happening again. The principal looked me in the eye and said, quietly, I'm sorry. Relief hid in waves. First, a choking gasp of disbelief, then a trembling that left me gripping the chair for balance. I thought about those months in isolation, the endless second-guessing, and realized how for so long I had bent under weight that had never been mine to carry. Justice had finally landed on my side, and yet it was both quieter and more powerful than I had imagined. By lunch, news had rippled through the halls. There were stares, some curious, some apologetic, and some still skeptical. Madison, Chloe, and Jess had been suspended and stripped of scholarships. Letters were sent to their parents, and their reputations, once golden, now wore the stain of actual wrongdoing. It wasn't about schadenfreude or getting revenge. I hadn't even wanted them destroyed. Just the truth acknowledged, the playing field made even. Still, in the warped mirror of high school politics, I'd become someone else. A symbol of resilience to some, a warning to others. I returned to my clubs and classes, a bit tentative at first, wary of the shifting tides. The debate team cheered when I walked in, but I could tell there was an uncertainty in their eyes. Not everyone believed in my innocence overnight. Some friendships dissolved after the truth, unable to withstand the tension of divided loyalties. But something wonderful blossomed, too. Classmates who once sat silent beside me now offered genuine words of support. Anna invited me to coffee. Terrell started walking with me to chemistry as a silent form of solidarity. It turned out I wasn't alone anymore, but the real justice was gentler and more personal. I found myself able to sleep again, to read for pleasure, to breathe without feeling a knot of dread in my stomach. I dove back into math problems, caught up on books I'd abandoned, and daydreamed about the future, not with anxiety, but with a cautious hope. My parents smiled over breakfast again, my mom slipping me notes that read, "Proud of you, always." The school, true to its word, asked me to help with a new peer support committee. They wanted protocols, real ones, for reporting academic abuse, and they wanted my input. I realized I had learned more about courage, systems, and the complexities of trust than I had in any AP class. I was determined to help make the school better, not just for me, but for every kid who'd ever been made to feel small or powerless. There was a kind of justice in that, too. Graduation approached, this time not shrouded in suspicion, but in the glow of hard-won freedom. When my name was called walking across the stage, I heard my parents cheering from somewhere in the back, and I let myself look up, really look up. In that moment, I felt bigger than the rumors, the system, or the betrayal. I'd stood my ground, I'd found my voice. And even if some scars lingered, they reminded me what I was capable of enduring and of changing. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I would change any of it. To erase the pain, to avoid the loneliness. Part of me aches for the simpler days and for the friends I once trusted. But another part of me knows that standing in the storm, refusing to be swept away, taught me truths about myself no success or popularity ever could. Justice wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about choosing every day to be the person I wanted to be. No matter who tried to write my story for me, I will always carry that lesson forward. When everything is stripped away and you feel like you've lost everything, the most important thing is never to lose yourself. Because in the end, that's what real justice is. Fighting for your own voice, your own story, and for the hope that maybe, just maybe, you can help make it easier for someone else to find theirs.